Our world needs individuals who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, innovators, and who understand the value of diversity.
Wise words from an education trailblazer, a college president making history right here in Indiana. She loves to sing, slip on her pink tennis shoes, and tool around in her red sports car. She's DePauw University President Dr. Lori White, and she's our guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Well, Dr. Lori White has been on the job as DePauw's president since last July. She is the first woman and first person of color to lead the university and is the only Black woman leading a university in the state of Indiana. She's no stranger to academics. She has an impressive 30-year resume, including administrative roles at Southern Methodist University, the University of Southern California, San Diego State, and Stanford. Her last stop was at Washington University in St. Louis, where she served as vice chancellor for student affairs. But what brought Dr. White to Indiana? What drives her? And how has her family's rich background in higher education influenced her? Let's get some answers from DePauw President Dr. Lori White. She joins us from the DePauw campus. And Dr. White, thanks for joining us. How are things in Greencastle?
Things are great in Greencastle, and thank you so much for asking me to be a guest on your show.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you. You know, thinking back, and I remember we had you on our TV show not long after you arrived in your new job. You arrived right in the middle of a pandemic. Could you have picked a worse time to start your job?
It's certainly not the way that I imagined I would be starting my job as a college president. That's for sure.
Lori, as you think back on that and in the intervening months and the challenges presented by the pandemic, talk about your role as a leader in working through some very difficult and really, I know it's an overused phrase, but unprecedented circumstances.
Well, I certainly have to give so much credit to the faculty, staff, and students at DePauw. Our goal in the fall was to be able to keep students on campus, those who chose to learn with us residentially in the fall, until November the 20th, and we made it. But it certainly took our students committing to our expectations to be masked up and socially distant. It certainly took having robust testing expectations and requirements, and it took everybody on our campus doing whatever it is that we could to make sure that we kept our residence halls and other residences clean and safe, that we were able to serve meals to students, that we could do everything that we needed to make sure that our students could still continue to learn residentially, as well as our faculty who pivoted so quickly to offer both in-class and on-campus learning, as well as learning to students who elected to stay home in the fall and needed to access their courses virtually. So it literally took a village to be able to pull that off.
Give us an inside look. I can't imagine the pressures that were involved because of all the different constituencies, students, families, faculty, the community. Some people maybe wanting to shut down, others putting pressure on to continue on. What was that like?
Well, I'll tell you, as I talk with my presidential colleagues across the country, none of us, of course, had ever been through anything like this. And so we had to make up the playbook as we went along. And, there certainly was a lot of pressure for us not to open, and there was equal pressure for us to get students back to the classroom. And so we had to determine what we thought was best for our community on campus and the community of Greencastle. And so ultimately made the decision to open at about 50% of our residential capacity because we knew that, or believed that was something that we could manage effectively.
How do you think overall, DePauw, but I think higher education in general, how do you think higher education has handled the pandemic?
Well, I think we've done the best that we can given the set of circumstances. I think it has been really, really tough on our students, regardless of whether they decided to come back to campus, because even deciding to come back to campus life was not as they had remembered it. Or if they elected to stay home and learn virtually, Zoom fatigue is real.
Yeah.
And, it really also required so much of our faculty to quickly pivot from what at DePauw is a 100% residential experience to offer classes virtually, which was not something we had traditionally done. And then, of course, it required us to work so closely with the Greencastle community, particularly our health professionals, to make sure that none of our decisions were in any way endangering the members of the community of Greencastle.
How has the pandemic and the experiences and things that have transpired, how has that, in your view, changed the future, or has it changed the future of higher education and how higher education is delivered?
Well, I think it's changed a lot in many ways, Gary. Here's some good news, though. So let me start with the good news, and then I'll talk about some of the ongoing challenges. So the good news is, for a residential liberal arts college like DePauw, the pandemic has reinforced how important the residential experience is to our students. They very much want to get back to campus, and they want to have what they remember as their traditional DePauw experience. And so for those folks who believed that we no longer needed a residential educational experience, I think the pandemic has proved that students really, those who are able, really enjoy the opportunity to live on campus and the community that is built when you're a residential student. I think we also learned that we can deliver education virtually, and that even when we come back to a residential campus community, there will still be some classes that I think we will decide to deliver virtually. We had a very successful leadership in the liberal arts course that involved about 100 of our students. We had guest speakers every week, speakers like Condoleezza Rice and other folks who have been incredibly successful leaders. And that's not a course we could have offered in our traditional format. It probably would have been a course where students had to apply and maybe 20 students would have gotten selected. And by using virtual tools, many more of our students were able to take advantage of that. So I think virtual learning is certainly here to stay. The pandemic also exposed all of the challenges that we knew existed in the educational system, particularly for students who are from lower income backgrounds, who might be first generation students, having to learn virtually without the opportunity, for example, to connect to an internet, without having great places where you could study at home, without having ready access to support services, really exposed the divide between those who have and those who have not. And so it's a real message and wake-up call for higher education and really education generally, that we've got to do a better job to support those students who don't have the same resources as students who come from wealthier and more privileged backgrounds.
Yeah, great perspective. The future of higher education, in particular liberal arts schools, so much attention being placed both publicly and privately on the cost of education. In your view, what is the future of a liberal arts education?
Well, I hope the future for liberal arts education continues to be bright. When we think about the innumerable challenges that we have to solve as a nation and as a world, liberal arts colleges train students to be critical thinkers, to be able to look at problems from an interdisciplinary lens, to think about not only preparing students for the jobs of today and tomorrow, but for the jobs that we haven't yet imagined. So I hope and believe there's still a bright future for liberal arts colleges. On the flip side, college in general, whether it's DePauw University, whether it's any other institution, we're all too expensive. And so I'm hopeful that we can work with the new Biden administration to think about ways to make higher education not cost prohibitive, because every student who desires a college education ought to have access. And so we've really got to think about ways that we can bring the price down.
Let's talk about your journey, the journey that brought you to DePauw. As I mentioned, administrative academic positions, Southern Methodist, Stanford, USC. Was it San Diego or San Diego State?
San Diego State, the
San
Aztecs.
Diego State, the Aztecs. And by the way, have you memorized all of the mascots of the Division I teams around the country?
Just about. Division III, I'm still working on, but
Good.
Just about every Division I mascot.
Good. Well, I'm pretty good at high school, so we'll have to have a competition sometime. but you've got a rich background in education. Most recently, you came from Washington University in St. Louis, another elite university, vice chancellor of student affairs. Talk about your career path and how you think that's really prepared you for this opportunity at DePauw.
Well, I certainly never imagined that I would be a college president. I did my undergraduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, where, as I always tell students, I was not the stellar student that perhaps I became later on in life. And one of the things that I became passionate about is trying to make sure that every student has maximum opportunity to facilitate and realize their hopes and their dreams. And the reason that I have been so focused on higher education is because most people know from my background that I come from a family that has been committed to education and public service. And so all of the positions that I've held at all of the wonderful universities that I had a chance to be affiliated with prior to coming to DePauw really prepared me well for the presidency that I didn't imagine that I would one day accept. And so just really thankful for all the mentorship that I received, all the incredible students that I've had a chance to work with along the way, and all of the folks who made it possible for me, as I always say to folks, say yes to the dress when I was offered the presidency of DePauw.
Yeah. Diversity and inclusion certainly are issues at the forefront today in the national consciousness. But that's really those things, diversity, inclusion, have really been a part of your nearly 40 years in education. Talk about that and how you envision infusing that into the experience at DePauw.
Well, diversity and inclusion has been also a part of my family's journey. Mm-hmm. My father was the very first African-American to receive a PhD in clinical psychology from Michigan State University in the early 1960s. And he said when he received his PhD, he became the first Black psychologist that he had ever seen. My mother is a registered nurse, and she was one of only two African-Americans in her nursing school class in San Francisco. And so when I was growing up, my parents really instilled in me and my two sisters that not only could we be whatever it is that we imagined and that we should strive for greatness, but also that we had a responsibility to continue to pay it forward. So whatever it is that we might have been blessed with in terms of education and other gifts, that we had to make a commitment to bringing along the next generation. And so throughout my career, that's one of the things that I have been committed to. And I always tell folks I will support and mentor anyone, but I have a particular commitment to making sure that African-American students, other students of color, first-generation students, and students that have been historically underrepresented in higher education have a chance and have really committed my life's work to making sure that everything that I do really focuses on those goals.
So you really do come from a family of trailblazers and role models. You were modeling your parents. Your mom and dad were actually divorced when you were 8. So you and your sisters were raised by a single mom. Talk about that experience and what ultimately the lessons learned and what you take away from that now as an adult.
Well, I grew up in an all-female household. And so the funny piece of that is that we're all huge sports fans. And people are always amazed that I know so much about football, enough that I could probably be a referee. And all of that I learned from my mother. But my mother, who is still alive at the age of 86, almost 87, was a fierce feminist, probably before I even knew what a feminist was. And my mother was a single parent, raising me and my two sisters, always worked, but always took us with her to her workplace. And my mother ran a program, I remember, for teenage mothers, and would always give speeches and work to inspire these young teenage mothers to think beyond their current circumstances. My mother, I'm only about 5 feet tall, and my mother's probably 1 inch taller than I am. And so I would see this feisty woman standing up in an auditorium full of all kinds of folks advocating for additional resources for the program that she had responsibility for. She was the boss of all kinds of folks. And I just thought that's what women did. And so it wasn't until much later when I would talk to other female friends of mine, when they would say that they didn't have female role models. I was just so incredibly grateful for my mother demonstrating to me and to my sisters that we literally could be whatever it is that we imagined.
It seems to me that you have a real appreciation for that, an appreciation for history. One quick story I'd like you to tell, and I think it was on your visit to DePauw, perhaps your interview, where you were touring a building on campus, Meharry Hall, where there are portraits of past university presidents. And you looked at those portraits, and a thought came to your mind.
That's absolutely correct. When people ask me at what moment did I know that I would say yes to the DePauw presidency if it were offered to me, that is exactly what happened. I was being given a tour by an incredible young man by the name of Dante Stewart, who has since graduated. And as part of the tour, he took us into East College, which is one of the iconic buildings on the DePauw campus, and Meharry Hall. And Meharry Hall, for those who have been in Meharry Hall before, at one point in time, used to obviously be a chapel. DePauw is a historically United Methodist university, which also happens to be the religion that I was raised in. And I'm a spiritual person. I always look for the sign from a higher power when I've got really major life decisions to make. And as we walked through Meharry Hall, I saw the portraits of all of the former presidents, numbers 1 through 20. I'm DePauw 21. And as I asked the greater power for a sign as to what I should do if I did receive the offer from DePauw, I saw the place where the portrait for number 21 will ultimately hang. And the voice from above said, "Your picture needs to be here." The voice from above says, "It's not about you, Lori. It's about what you represent for future generations of DePauw. Future generations need to know what's possible. So you need to step forward and change the image that people have of college presidents. You need to be the first woman president. You need to be the first African-American president." So I said yes.
That aha moment. Yeah, very good. Okay, the stopwatch, the ticking stopwatch sounds means it's time for the 2-minute drill. Quick answers to some of life's most pressing questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. One word that describes Lori White.
Optimistic.
Biggest pet peeve.
Complainers.
Meal at a 5-star restaurant or a garlic cheeseburger at Marvin's?
Garlic cheeseburger at Marvin's.
I knew that was the answer. Dog or cat?
Dog.
I think I know the answer to this one too. Football or basketball?
Depends on the season.
Okay. I thought you might say football. Music or podcast? What do you listen to more?
Music.
Your go-to song or your go-to artist to get you fired up, revved up for the day or a big event?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Very nice. I had a question about music for you or singing in a moment too. Childhood hero other than your parents?
Childhood hero, Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Guilty pleasure?
Bourbon.
Okay, very. We're on the same wavelength on that. Is cheerleading a sport?
Yes.
Okay, I knew you'd answer that way too. I'll give you an easy one to wrap up here. Lori, who wins the next Moan on Bell game?
DePauw.
Of course. Yeah.
Go Tigers.
All right. Well, that was great. Some great answers in our 2-minute drill, Lori. When we come back, we want to get to know Lori White, the person, what makes her tick. And we will do that when we return. This is the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC.
Reminded my mother of a quote about the importance of living lives of service that she often shared with my 2 sisters and with me when we were growing up. The quote is from Marion Wright Edelman, who said, "Service is the rent that we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life."
Well, welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. That was Dr. Lori White, DePauw University's president, as she was announced as the university's 21st president. And Dr. White, great to have you with us again. That quote from your mother, I'm sure that's a very special quote and something very near and dear to your heart.
Yes, it is. That service is the rent we pay for our space on the earth. I didn't get that exactly right, but I think the sentiments are that we have a commitment to serving others and paying life forward.
Well, let's get to know Lori White a little bit more. You have a very interesting story. Very disciplined. Are you up at 4 a.m. about every day? Days?
I am.
What do you like about getting up early and being an early riser?
I'm a morning person, and I feel like there's just so much day to be spent well and wise when you get up early.
Yeah. You're very regimented, routine. Do you have a pretty set breakfast regimen during the week?
That is correct. And, my dad was very regimented, so I probably got that from him. If you could give me a day of the week and the time, I could tell you exactly what it is that he was doing. So yes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, avocado toast with egg, and Tuesday, Thursday, oatmeal and peanut butter.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay. I read this story, so I don't have all the particulars. Maybe you can fill it in. And this is an example of your focus and how focused you are. And that was a story about you establishing a timetable for finishing your PhD, and it had something to do with the license plate.
That's correct. So I believe in putting something out there so that people can hold you accountable. And I'm also very goal oriented. So when I started graduate school in 1991, and mind you, I was an older graduate student. I started graduate school at the age of 33. I had quit my full-time job to become a full-time graduate student at Stanford. And I was determined to get out in 4 years. And so when I started in 1991, I put a license plate on my car that said PhD 1995. And by golly, I finished in 1995.
You had a goal and you made it. Tell me about it. You can tell I've been getting some information, a little intel on you. Tell me about your magic wand.
So I have a magic wand in my office. And the reason that I have a magic wand is that I want to empower the people that work with me to believe in their capacity to make decisions. And so when somebody comes to me and they're wrestling with something that I think they can fully make a decision about without me having to weigh in necessarily, I get the wand off my desk. I tap them on the shoulder and I say, "You are queen or king for the day, and go forth and make that incredible decision that I know that you have full capability of making."
I like it. Magic powers. Now, as proven earlier in the podcast here, you love to sing. Anywhere, shower, office, whatever it is. I'm told you love to sing. Where is the strangest place that you have broken into song?
Probably the strangest place that I have broken into song was that at my very first board meeting as the new president, I broke into song at the end of my remarks, and I don't think the board was quite prepared for a singing president.
I'm sure they were impressed, though. Now, if you were to sing on the Business and Beyond podcast, what would it sound like?
Well, I love spirituals. And as a matter of fact, I just was with my high school classmates celebrating posthumously the 100th birthday of our incredible music teacher when I was in junior high and high school. And she was the one who introduced all of us to old Negro spirituals. And so, depending on my mood, I might, break into a particular spiritual. So, for example, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, or will understand it better by and by. There's a bright side somewhere. So it really just depends on my particular mood, what song I'm inspired to sing.
I love it. Everyone here in Indianapolis loved that. That was outstanding. You are very competitive. I don't think there's any question about that. A big college sports fan, a cheerleader. You coached, I think, college level cheer, and you were a cheerleader yourself. What is it about cheerleading that you really love?
Well, I think, so this will be interesting. I like the competitiveness of cheerleading, but what I really like about cheerleading is the spirit piece of it. And in fact, if you talked with anybody from my high school, I had a special cheer that I was known for when I was in high school, that everybody across the city knew me as, oh, that's the cheerleader who sings that particular cheer after every game. And so I just like the ability to convey support for the teams on the field, to be able to have people be bonded together when they're singing school songs or engaging in cheering for their team. And of course, I like the competitive aspect because, when I had my team, I wanted to make sure that we took number one. But it's really the spirit part mostly that I love about cheerleading.
Now, do you remember the cheer that you would?
I do.
Can you give us?
Na 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 na. Just goes on from there.
I love it. That is outstanding. That's great. What motivates you? Is there anything in particular that really motivates you in business, in life?
What motivates me, and I think this is why I love my work so much in higher education, is I don't have children of my own. My husband and I got married later in life, which doesn't mean I couldn't have had children. But in my generation, there was a particular order to things. And I was waiting until I found a life partner before I wanted to have kids. And by the time that came around, it was a little too late for me to have my own biological children. So what drives me really is the opportunity to mentor, support, advise, and invest in the next generation. I just have great hope for young people. And when I think about all the challenges facing our nation and facing our world, to be able to work with young people, to inspire them to think about ways in which they can make this world a better and more equitable place for everyone, that's what drives me every day.
That's great. You mentioned mentors. How about you? Have you had mentors or a particular mentor that's been very special or important to you?
So I've certainly had mentors all throughout my life. I wouldn't be where I am today without people investing in me. So other than my parents, I would say one of my most treasured mentors is Dr. Condoleezza Rice, who, of course, is former Secretary of State. And when I met her, she was the provost at Stanford and I was a graduate student. And she and I ended up bonding initially, ironically, because of our love of sports. Her father was a former football coach, and he actually worked for me when I was the director of undergraduate advising at Stanford. He helped work with our student athletes. And as I got to know her Daddy, as we call him, and then got to know Condi, we figured out we both shared this great love of sports and started going to sporting events together. And then she just took a real interest in me personally and professionally, and has just been a steady presence in my life ever since graduate school.
That's a great story. Maybe she can invite you down to Augusta, play the master's course down there too.
One sport I do not play is golf.
Is it?
But
okay.
She and I have already been talking about if Stanford makes the NC2A tournament, having her come to Indianapolis so that we can attend some of the games in the bubble.
Oh, that is outstanding. A final question in this round. Got to know about the pink shoes and your red BMW sports car.
So the pink tennis shoes, sometimes when an administrator has a big fancy title, students in particular are intimidated by developing a relationship or striking up a conversation with that person. And as I think I indicated earlier, I'm a real petite person. I'm about 5 feet tall, and I always wear really, really high heels. But when I'm walking across campus from one meeting to another, those high heels are not going to quite cut it. And so I just grabbed a pair of pink tennis shoes. And then after a while, those became my trademark. And so students would know when they saw me on campus, they're like, that's her. That's the vice president for student affairs. Or now that's the president. She's got on pink tennis shoes. I think I can probably go up and say hello to her. She doesn't seem so scary. Anybody who wears pink tennis shoes every day can't be that scary. So that just became, one of my marks of identity to students on campus. And then my red sports car. So red is my absolute favorite color. Though now that I work at DePauw, because that is the color of our rival.
Wabash, that's right. Oh my gosh, yeah.
So when I turned 50 and had my, first early midlife crisis, I thought to myself, I want to buy a fancy sports car because this is the last fun car I'm going to have. I keep my cars for like 18, 20 years before I become an old lady and have to have an old lady car. And so I zeroed in. I had a BMW beforehand. I knew I wanted a convertible. And so as I started looking for the type of car that I wanted, I zeroed in on a BMW convertible, and it is really sweet.
I'll bet it is. Final question for you, Dr. White, and that is we're hopefully beginning to exit, hopefully, the pandemic. As you look at the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, your vision for the DePauw campus and DePauw University?
Well, since you already mentioned that I'm competitive, my vision is that we will be the #1 liberal arts college in the country. We are currently, depending on the poll, in the top 50, in the top 30. I want us to be #1. I want us to be an institution where any student who desires a DePauw education has full access, so that we have the financial aid and scholarship resources to be able to provide that. I want us to be an institution that's fully committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, so that every student on our campus feels affirmed, regardless of their identity and their background. And I want us to live up to our motto that we train leaders that the world needs.
Dr. Lori White is the president of DePauw University. Dr. White, you've got a fascinating story, a great background in education, great personality as well. This has been really fun to talk with you on the Business and Beyond podcast. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm very excited to be here in the Hoosier State.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. For more information on this podcast and for business news 24/7, be sure to check out InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.